Have you ever paused in the relentless rush of life, taken a hard look at the constant busyness, and asked yourself, is this really the life I want? There's a vague sense of unease, a weariness that doesn't come from your body, but from your very soul. Imagine a mind being pulled in two directions. One part of you longs for rest, yet feels paralyzed by what we often label as laziness, a procrastination born from fear or overwhelm. Another part tries to tighten its grip on control, mapping out every scenario in detail, only to burn out and grow anxious when reality stubbornly refuses to obey. We become too nice. We smile and agree while our inner world is screaming from exhaustion. We sacrifice our boundaries in exchange for approval, to please the crowd, to sidestep judgment. We fear what others think so deeply that we willingly abandon our truest self. We live for external validation. We wait for motivation that never comes. We try to control what was never ours to control. If any of this, procrastination, control anxiety, or the fatigue of people-pleasing, echoes deep within you, then perhaps it's time to ask a different question. Is there a way to find real peace, an inner strength that cannot be shaken by life's storms? Is there a way to reclaim your agency and live a meaningful life, even in the midst of chaos? The answer, perhaps counterintuitive to us, does not lie in a new app, a productivity hack, or any other passing trend. The answer has always been timeless. It lives in the deep, enduring wisdom of philosophy. For centuries, we may have treated philosophy as a dusty, academic subject, something to know, not something to live. But this is a profound misunderstanding. Philosophy, at its core, is not abstract theorizing. It is a practical toolkit for transformation. It is the rigorous art of examining our thoughts, challenging our assumptions, and fundamentally changing how we think, how we act, and ultimately, how we experience our one and only life. In our modern world, drowned in notifications and endless social news feeds, these ancient lessons are more urgent than ever. We are swept into a relentless chase for external validation, hanging our self-worth on metrics we cannot control. We're conditioned to fear judgment, to please others at the cost of ourselves, and to search for an illusion of control in a world that is inherently uncertain. That is why, today, we are not merely discussing a philosophy. We are beginning a deeper journey. Together, we will dissect 5 foundational challenges of the human condition, 5 daily battles fought within our own minds, and unearth timeless wisdom to overcome them. We will explore the path to freedom from social conditioning and ask the deeper question, how do we stop caring about what others think? We will confront the paralyzing grip of procrastination, moving beyond quick fixes to uncover the root of overcoming laziness. We will examine the hidden, corrosive cost of being too nice and discover the strength required to set healthy boundaries. We will wrestle with one of life's greatest paradoxes, the temptation of control and the liberating power of letting go, delving into the dichotomy of control, highlighted by Stoicism. And finally, we will find our guide in one of history's greatest mirrors of inner strength, exploring the profound self-discipline of Marcus Aurelius. Through this journey, we will aim to build a framework for a life of true meaning, resilience, and inner peace. This is not just a video, it is an excavation of the soul, and we begin by confronting the first, and perhaps most common, prison, the prison built by other people's opinions. To understand how we can escape these modern burdens, we have to return to their origins, not the origin of our anxiety, but the origin of the wisdom forged to resist it. The ideas we're about to explore were not born in comfort or academic leisure. They were born in fire, refined under the harshest pressures of the human experience. Look to ancient Rome, a formidable empire perpetually shaken by war, plague, and political instability. It was in this chaos that Stoicism flourished, not as abstract theory, but as practical armor for the mind. Think of Epictetus, a slave who became a great philosopher, and Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful emperor in the world, both wrestling with the same core question. In the midst of absolute chaos, I cannot control. Where can I find peace and virtue? Marcus Aurelius's Meditations was not written for the public. It was the private journal of a man training his self-discipline to face the unimaginable pressures of power and loss. Then, thousands of years later, shift to 19th and 20th century Europe, a continent reeling from the collapse of traditional values and the devastation of 2 world wars. From these ashes rose existential thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche and Jean-Paul Sartre. They stared into the abyss of a universe seemingly stripped of fixed meaning and dared to ask, if no one grants us purpose, how do we create our own? How do we live authentically when all of society tries to force us into a mold? Nietzsche's philosophy of self-overcoming is not an intellectual exercise. It's a passionate call to action, to become the architect of your fate instead of its victim. At the same time, psychologists like Viktor Frankl witnessed firsthand the endurance of the human spirit in the worst conditions imaginable, inside concentration camps. He realized that even when everything is taken away, a person retains one final freedom, the freedom to choose one's attitude in the face of adversity. These philosophies and psychological insights, from the inner control of Stoicism to the radical freedom of existentialism, are our context. They are our inheritance. They are maps drawn by those who walked through darkness and found light, giving us the firm foundation to begin our first analysis, the struggle to win freedom from the prison of social judgment. The first core principle we must confront, the bedrock that blocks most self-development efforts, is freedom from social constraints. This is the struggle to release the fear of judgment and live true to your authentic self. Let's define this prison clearly. It isn't made of visible walls, but of an invisible web of expectations, a constant psychological surveillance. It begins when we're young, learning to adjust our behavior to earn approval from parents, teachers, friends, and now from countless strangers on social media. This fear, the fear of being mocked, excluded, misunderstood, or simply disliked, becomes our silent warden. It decides the clothes we wear, the career paths we choose, and even the dreams we allow ourselves to hold. We are paying far too high a price for the safety of this illusion. That price is authenticity. When the fear of judgment drives our decisions, we begin to live a performance. We make choices not because they align with our core values, but because they look right to others. This is precisely where existential thinkers like Jean-Paul Sartre and Friedrich Nietzsche step in. Sartre argues that living authentically is a precondition for freedom and meaning. To live inauthentically, or, in his words, in bad faith, is to lie to ourselves by pretending we have no choice, that we must conform to social norms. Conversely, Nietzsche's philosophy, especially the idea of self-overcoming, demands the courage to rise above herd mentality and define our own values, rather than passively inheriting them from the crowd. But how do we find the strength to be authentic? This leads us to a closely related idea: the crucial difference between self-respect and external validation. External validation is fleeting. It depends entirely on praise and applause, things outside our control. When we build our self-worth on it, we become like an addict, always needing the next dose of approval just to feel okay. We grow fragile, devastated by petty criticism, and panicked by silence. In contrast, durable self-respect is built on intrinsic values. It doesn't depend on whether you succeed, but on whether you gave your best effort. It doesn't hinge on whether others see you as kind, but on whether you know you acted with virtue. This is where the timeless wisdom of Stoicism becomes invaluable. Philosophers like Epictetus and Emperor Marcus Aurelius teach a core mental discipline: the dichotomy of control. They remind us that most of what happens in life, including other people's opinions, praise, or blame, lies beyond our absolute control. Trying to control these things isn't just futile, it's a formula for misery. Instead, Stoicism requires us to focus all our energy on what truly belongs to us: our thoughts, our judgments, our responses, and our character. This is the philosophical answer to the practical question: how do we stop caring about what others think? It doesn't mean becoming rude or dismissing all feedback. It means radically reorienting your inner compass. Your worth is not decided by the crowd's applause. Your worth is decided by the integrity of your actions. As Marcus Aurelius reminded himself in his journal, if you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it, and it is in your power to wipe out this judgment now. Thus, the definition of freedom from social constraints is a dual discipline: the existential courage to choose your authentic path, and the Stoic discipline to focus solely on the virtue of your actions, regardless of outcomes or outside judgment. This is ultimate liberation, allowing true personal growth and genuine relationships to take root. That's the theory, but what does it look like when applied to a real situation, where social pressure is pressing hard on your shoulders? Have we bring this to life through a story? Consider the case of Emily, a young artist full of talent. For years, she painted safe works, technically beautiful pieces that galleries could easily accept and the market would readily embrace. She received praise, she sold paintings, but inside, an emptiness kept growing. What she was creating was an echo of what others wanted, not her own voice. She was living in Sartre's bad faith, pretending she had to paint this way to survive, while knowing she was betraying herself. Then, one day, she stood before a blank canvas, and the familiar fear rushed in. If I paint what I truly feel, something messy, jagged, and imperfect, what will they think? They'll say I've lost my talent. They'll reject me. But this time, another question rose up, one with Nietzsche's resonance. Is their approval worth as much as my self-respect? That day, Emily made a choice. She chose artistic authenticity. She painted not to be praised, but to express the truth. The painting she created was radically different. It was raw, full of feeling, and it puzzled some critics. A few old friends didn't understand it. But for the first time in years, Emily felt whole. She embraced the terrifying freedom of becoming herself. She stopped seeking permission from the outside world simply to exist. Or look at the case of Alex, a professional in a fiercely competitive corporate environment. For a long time, Alex's self-esteem was like a ship without an anchor, tossed by every wind of praise and blame. When his boss complimented him in a meeting, he felt like a king. But when a colleague offered a small critique, even a constructive one, his whole world collapsed. He spent hours analyzing emails, trying to decode the real intent behind every word, living in constant anxiety about his image. He was a slave to external validation. Change began when Alex encountered Stoicism. He learned that trying to fully control what others think of you is an impossible, self-destructive mission. He began practicing the dichotomy of control. When preparing for a major project, instead of obsessing over whether clients would like him, Alex focused on what he could control: the quality of his research, the clarity of his reasoning, and the honesty of his presentation. His inner compass shifted from, "What do they think of me?" to, "Did I act with virtue?" When faced with criticism, instead of reacting defensively, he trained himself to pause and ask objectively, "Is there anything useful here that I can use? The rest is just their opinion, and it lies outside my control." Gradually, something remarkable happened. Alex's self-respect became durable. It no longer depended on the fickle emotional market of praise and blame. It was anchored to something far more solid: his own intrinsic values and the integrity of his actions. He still listened to feedback, but he was no longer defined by it. Both Emily and Alex found freedom by shifting their focus. They learned the core lesson: you cannot live an authentic life if you constantly outsource your self-worth to other people. But even when we free ourselves from others' judgments and find inner self-respect, we often face a more devious enemy, one that comes from within. An enemy that stops us from acting on these newly found values. We know what we should do, yet we find ourselves paralyzed. We call it by a simple, heavy name: laziness. The second core principle, and perhaps the most common inner enemy on the path of growth, is the struggle to overcome laziness. We need to redefine this concept immediately. The word lazy is often used as a weapon, a moral judgment about character. But this is a dangerous misunderstanding. The laziness most of us experience is not a fixed state. It's a symptom. It's a complex loop of many factors: lack of motivation, underlying fear, overwhelm, and poor planning. It is not who you are. It is a state you are in. And because it's a complex system, the key to overcoming it is not a grand burst of willpower, but the application of small, steady, executable strategies. First, we must draw clear distinctions. The chronic procrastination we call laziness must be carefully distinguished from mental health conditions, such as depression or burnout. These are serious medical conditions that require professional care and intervention. Sometimes what is misread as laziness is, in fact, the body and mind crying out for help. Laziness is also often confused with something far deeper: the absence of meaning. When a person cannot find a reason large enough to move them, resistance is natural. So let's discard the myth that laziness is merely a lack of will. That is an oversimplification. It is the outcome of a complex web of cognition, emotion, and context. To dismantle it, we cannot simply try harder. We must diagnose root causes. The first and most basic cause is the absence of clear goals. When our goals are vague, like be better or be more successful, the mind has no definite target to latch onto, and motivation withers. A vague goal doesn't generate energy. We need intelligent goals and, even more importantly, goals that are deeply tethered to personal values. This is where philosophy becomes fuel. Both Viktor Frankl and Nietzsche agree that purpose and meaning are the most enduring human drivers. When you have a big enough why, you can endure almost any how. The second cause is overwhelming tasks. Sometimes we do have a clear goal, but its sheer scale triggers psychological freeze. We stare at the mountain and, instead of stepping forward, we go numb. The solution here is practical. Break the work down. Use techniques like the Pomodoro technique. But philosophically, this is where Stoicism returns. Instead of obsessing over conquering the entire mountain, which lies outside our control in this moment, we apply the dichotomy of control. We focus only on the single step we can control right now. We move forward one natural step at a time. The third cause may be the deepest: fear of failure. This is laziness as self-defense. Procrastination and avoidance often serve as a shield for a fragile ego. We fear that if we try our best and still fail, it will confirm our inadequacy. So, unconsciously, we choose failure by not trying, to preserve the illusion that if I really tried, I could have done it. The way out of this prison is a shift to a growth mindset, and, more profoundly, to Nietzsche's philosophy of amor fati, love your fate. This demands that we not only accept, but embrace failure as necessary material for growth. Failure is not an endpoint. It is data, a lesson, the whetstone that sharpens us. The fourth cause concerns intrinsic motivation. Modern psychology, especially self-determination theory, shows that humans need 3 psychological nutrients to thrive: autonomy, competence, and relatedness. When a task strips away our autonomy, makes us feel inept or lacks meaningful connection, our intrinsic motivation is depleted. We feel lazy because the work does not nourish us. And finally, the fifth cause is poor time management. A lack of clear priorities breeds overwhelm, and overwhelm breeds procrastination. This is where another Stoic, Seneca, offers a profound lens. He saw time not merely as a resource to manage, but as a moral asset. To waste time is to waste the most precious part of life. This elevates the use of tools like time blocking or prioritization to a higher level. They are not mere productivity hacks. They are ethical practices. Thus, laziness is not a single monster. It is a many-headed dragon. Vague goals, oversized tasks, fear of failure, depleted intrinsic motivation, and disorganization. Understanding these causes is the first and most important step toward deconstructing it. The theory is one thing. But what does applying these diagnoses look like in real life? Consider the story of someone named James. James believes he's a lazy person. He has a book he wants to write, a goal he's nurtured for years. But every day, he finds himself swallowed by endless distractions, cleaning the house, or simply staring at a blinking cursor on a blank screen. The shame of not acting is more exhausting than the writing itself. His change didn't begin with a burst of motivation, but with an honest diagnosis. First, he confronted the vagueness of his goal. Write a book is too big and unclear. Following Frankl's advice, he asked himself, why? The answer wasn't to become famous, but to share an idea I believe could help other people. That value-based why became his fuel. He turned the vague goal into something concrete. Finish a detailed outline in the next 30 days. Immediately, he faced the second enemy, overwhelm. 30 days was still too big. Applying a Stoic spirit, he let go of obsessing over the final outcome, completing the outline, and focused entirely on what he could control today. He broke the task down. Today, I won't write the outline. I'll just write down 3 main ideas for Chapter 1. He used the Pomodoro technique, promising himself just 25 minutes of work. Anyone can do 25 minutes. The mountain vanished. Only a single step remained. On day 3, he hit the biggest wall, fear of failure. What he wrote was terrible. The urge to quit and retreat into the comfort of laziness was almost unbearable. This was the decisive moment. Instead of taking it as proof of his inadequacy, he applied the mindset of amor fati. He told himself, this is part of the process. Bad writing is the necessary step to good writing. This failure isn't a wall, it's a path. He accepted imperfection and kept going, knowing he could edit tomorrow. Throughout the process, James had to cultivate intrinsic motivation. He realized he was procrastinating because he treated writing like an imposed obligation. Now, he reframed it. He found autonomy by choosing to write in the mornings when he felt his best. He found competence by tracking his word count rising each day, creating a tangible sense of progress. And he found relatedness by sharing his struggles with a close friend who was also pursuing a project. Finally, he addressed poor time management. Inspired by Seneca, he began to treat his time as sacred. He implemented time blocking. From 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock every morning, that was inviolable writing time. It wasn't something he did if he had time. It was something he prioritized first. After a few weeks, James still had bad days, but he was no longer a lazy person. He was someone in motion. He didn't defeat laziness with willpower. He dismantled it with strategy. He changed the cognitive and behavioral loop that had imprisoned him. But as James began to protect that sacred 8-9 a.m. window, he ran into a new problem. One that didn't come from within, but from the outside. The phone calls he chose not to answer, the invitations he had to decline. He began to feel selfish. Other people's discomfort started to weigh on him. And this brings us to a far more devious prison, a prison disguised as virtue, the hidden cost of always trying to please everyone. We now arrive at the third core principle, a prison often praised as a virtue, the hidden cost of being too nice. Let's define this clearly. We are not talking about genuine kindness. True kindness comes from a place of fullness, strength, and conscious choice. It is a gift given freely. By contrast, The excessive niceness we are dissecting is a performative behavior. It's a disguised defense mechanism. It's a strategy born from fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of disappointing others. It is a transaction. We trade our compliance and self-sacrifice for approval, or simply to buy a momentary peace. What is the hidden cost here? It creates an emotional debt. Every time you say yes while your inner self is screaming no, you are borrowing against your own mental health. This debt accumulates, not in money, but in simmering resentment, emotional exhaustion, and ultimately, cynicism. You become depleted, and, ironically, you start resenting the very people you've tried so hard to please. Furthermore, it produces shallow relationships. When you constantly wear the mask of being easygoing, others never get the chance to connect with your real self. They connect with the representative, the edited version of you. These relationships lack the trust and depth that only authenticity can bring. Social and cultural pressures often exacerbate this. We are taught, especially in some cultures, that being agreeable is the highest virtue. We elevate harmony, sometimes to the point that those who dare to have divergent opinions or set healthy boundaries are made to feel like troublemakers or selfish. This pressure to keep the peace pulls us away from our true selves, leaving us in a state of chronic anxiety, constantly scanning the environment for signs of discord and smothering it with our own self-sacrifice. This is a psychological torture. People-pleasing is a full-time job that never pays, and it is directly linked to anxiety, depression, and burnout. It creates emotionally imbalanced relationships in which your needs are perpetually secondary. Great philosophers have warned us about this trap. Aristotle spoke of the golden mean. For him, every virtue lies at the balance point between two extremes. If kindness is a virtue, then its deficiency is cruelty. But its excess, kindness to the point of self-erasure, an inability to say no even when harmed, is also a moral failure. It lacks another crucial virtue, self-respect. Jean-Paul Sartre would call this another form of bad faith. It's when you act as if you have no choice, as if you are compelled to please others, but you always have a choice. Perhaps most powerfully, Immanuel Kant's view of human dignity applies here. Kant argued that we have a fundamental moral duty to treat humanity, both in ourselves and in others, always as an end, never merely as a means. When you become a chronic people-pleaser, you violate this principle. You use yourself as a means, a tool, to obtain others' approval or to soothe their emotions. You relinquish your own autonomy and dignity. Therefore, excessive niceness is not a virtue. It is a failure to protect your boundaries, a misunderstanding of kindness, and ultimately, a surrender of personal dignity. How can someone deeply trapped in this self-defeating habit find the way out? Let's consider the story of Alex, and perhaps we'll see a part of ourselves in him. Alex is someone everyone loves. At work, he's the one who's always reliable. He'll stay late to finish someone else's project, take on extra shifts without complaint, and listen endlessly to co-workers' grievances, even when his own schedule is stacked to the ceiling. In his personal life, he's the mediator, the one who always says yes to every plan, the one who adjusts his own desires to fit everyone else. On the surface, Alex is the model of kindness. But inside, a quiet tragedy is unfolding. His kindness has become an expected obligation, no longer a choice. He realizes that on the rare occasion he says no because he's truly exhausted, the response he receives is not understanding, but surprise, even indignation. His boundaries have been blurred to the point of non-existence. He no longer knows what he wants. He only knows what others expect of him. He begins to feel resentful. He's tired of giving, but even more afraid of the consequences of stopping. He is living in what philosopher Kant warned against. He has turned himself into a means to serve other people's ends, relinquishing his autonomous dignity. The turning point comes one evening, when he misses his daughter's important performance, an event he had promised to attend, simply because he couldn't say no to an urgent but unimportant work request from his boss. Seeing the disappointment in his child's eyes, Alex realizes the terrible price of his kindness. The approval he earned at the office has been paid for with his integrity at home. This crisis forces him to wake up. This is where the journey back to himself begins, and it's built on 3 pillars of solutions. First, and most important, is establishing clear boundaries. Alex has to relearn a language he's forgotten, the language of self-respect. He must understand that boundaries are not an aggressive act. They are an act of self-preservation. Boundaries are not walls to push people away. They are the necessary fences that protect your mental and emotional space so you can engage the world in a healthy way. He starts small, learning to say, "I can't take that on right now," or "I need time to think about that." Each time is incredibly difficult, but each time he wins back a piece of his own soul. Second, he must distinguish and cultivate genuine kindness instead of performative niceness. Genuine kindness, as we defined it, comes from fullness. It is a conscious choice. Alex learns to be kind to others because it aligns with his values, not because he fears their reactions. This means his kindness now includes honesty. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to say no respectfully. Finally, this requires personal growth through self-awareness. Alex has to ask himself hard questions. Why am I so afraid of conflict? Where does this need for approval come from? He must practice assertiveness. This is Aristotle's golden mean. It's neither passivity nor aggression. It's the ability to express your needs and opinions clearly, honestly, and respectfully, while also acknowledging others' right to do the same. As Alex begins this journey, he does indeed lose some friendships that were built on his compliance, but he gains something far more valuable, his own respect, and relationships that are deeper, more genuine, grounded in mutual respect. He is still a kind person, but now his kindness springs from strength, not fear. Solving procrastination and establishing boundaries are enormous inner victories, but they are often challenged by an external force, the unpredictable chaos of life itself. This brings us to a profound paradox, our obsession with controlling everything. So, how can we weave all these principles into the busy, noisy, high-pressure reality of modern life? We've traveled a significant inner journey. We confronted the prison of social judgment and sought durable self-respect. We dissected the complex procrastination we call laziness, uncovering the true drivers beneath it. And we exposed the steep price of being too nice, recognizing the moral power of setting boundaries. But knowing is not enough. Philosophy, as we said at the start, is an act of transformation. This is the take-home part. This is how we turn these profound theories into concrete, everyday action. The foundation of all this change is a fundamental reorientation, shifting from trying to control the external world, other people's opinions, final outcomes, other people's emotions, to mastering our inner world, our values, actions, and reactions. This is the ultimate discipline. Strategy 1. Build an inner fortress. Inner strength is not something you find. It's something you build, one brick a day. Morning, set the compass. Before you pick up your phone, before the outer world floods your mind with its demands and judgments, take 5 minutes. Don't just plan what you must do. Decide who you will be. Practice. Combating judgment. Ask yourself the Stoic question. What are my core values today? Honesty, discipline, genuine kindness? By anchoring yourself in intrinsic values, you start the day with your own shield, making external validation less important than your own self-respect. Practice. Combating laziness. Ask yourself the Frankel-Nietzsche question. What is my why today? It doesn't need to be grand. It can be as simple as to complete one meaningful task, or to be present with my family. A clear purpose is the strongest fuel for overcoming laziness. During the day, moments of choice. Real change happens in the small, tense moments of the day. When facing judgment. When a critical email arrives or a negative comment appears, pause. Apply the dichotomy of control. Ask, what part of this belongs to me? Their reaction, no. My effort and integrity? Yes. Focus on learning from the useful part, if any, and discard the emotional noise. This is the practical way to stop caring about what others think. When facing procrastination, work, projects. When you feel paralyzed by overwhelm, remember James's story. Don't look at the mountain. Apply mindfulness to productivity. Focus fully on one single, controllable step. I won't write the entire report. I'll write the title and 3 bullet points. Small, deliberate action breaks paralysis. When facing pressure, family, friends. When someone asks for something you can't or don't want to do, recognize the emotional debt. This is your chance to practice. You don't need to be aggressive. Use a polite refusal. I appreciate the invitation, but I can't commit to that right now. Every time you set a healthy boundary, you send a powerful message to yourself. My needs matter too. Evening. Seneca's Review. The Stoic philosopher Seneca had a nightly habit of asking himself, what bad habit did I heal today? What temptation did I resist? In what way did I become better? Practice. Take 2 minutes to review your day. Where did I live authentically today? Where did I let fear of judgment steer me? What did I postpone because of fear? Where did I fail to protect my boundaries? Don't judge, just observe. This self-awareness is fertile soil for tomorrow's growth. Strategy 2. Redesign your environment. Philosophy cannot live only in your mind. It must be expressed in your actions and your spaces. At work, turn your work from a race for external approval into a practice of inner virtue. Action. Use time blocking as Seneca's ethical practice. Guard your deep work hours as you would your most precious asset. This is a physical boundary against interruption. Connection. When you do this, you're integrating all three concepts. You're setting boundaries, countering the excessive niceness of always being available. You're overcoming laziness by creating structure for action, and you're shifting focus away from external validation, like replying to emails instantly, toward inner self-respect, the satisfaction of completing valuable work. In relationships. Your relationships should be where you practice authenticity, not where you perform. Action. Conduct an authenticity audit. Think of one important relationship. Are you being yourself, or are you playing a role? Choose one small action to be more authentic. It can be as simple as sharing an honest opinion, kindly, about a movie, rather than passively agreeing. Connection. This requires courage. It combines letting go of judgment and abandoning people-pleasing. As Aristotle suggested about virtuous friendship, the best relationships are not built on artificial harmony, but on mutual respect for each other's real selves, people who grow together. Ultimate synthesis, the paradox of control. Looking back at all three struggles, fear of judgment, procrastination, and excessive niceness, we see a common thread, a single root. All three are expressions of an illusion of control. We fear judgment, so we try to control others' opinions by becoming perfect or invisible. We procrastinate out of fear of failure, because we cannot control the final outcome, so we choose inaction. We're too nice because we try to control other people's emotional reactions, soothing them to avoid conflict. Therefore, the greatest practical application, the synthesis of all this wisdom, lies in a beautiful paradox. Real power does not come from tightening control. It comes from releasing control over what was never ours in the first place. This is the summit of the dichotomy of control. A deep, radical acceptance that you have power only over your own mind, not over external events. Accept the fear of judgment and act according to your values anyway. Accept the possibility of failure and take the first step anyway. Accept that others may be disappointed and protect your boundaries anyway. This is not an overnight shift. It is a marathon, not a sprint. It demands persistence. As studies have shown, forming a new habit can take an average of 66 days or even longer. Don't try to fix everything at once. That will only lead to overwhelm and a return to the old loop. Instead, start small. Choose one area. Maybe this week you focus on just one thing, noticing when you're about to say yes while you want to say no, and simply pausing. That's a win. Or maybe you focus on doing one 25-minute block of meaningful work, regardless of the outcome. That's a win. The journey toward a steady inner life is not about perfection. It's about conscious progress. Of course, applying these philosophies to real life is not a smooth road, nor is it without legitimate challenges. The pursuit of authenticity and inner discipline faces important criticisms we cannot ignore. Some may argue that the advice to stop caring what others think is a slippery slope. Could it slide into raw selfishness, a justification for ignoring constructive feedback and hurting others without remorse? Could focusing too intensely on the inner compass make us isolated, draining us of the empathy necessary to maintain healthy social relationships? Furthermore, when we discuss overcoming laziness, are we unintentionally placing too much burden on the individual while overlooking systemic barriers? Critics argue this approach can lead to victim blaming. Is procrastination always a personal failure of mindset, or is it sometimes a completely reasonable response to chronic exhaustion, exploitative working conditions, or deep inequalities that no personal philosophy can fix on its own? And finally, the call to set boundaries and avoid being too nice. Is this philosophy suitable for everyone, especially those in marginalized positions where people-pleasing may be a necessary survival strategy? While Stoicism emphasizes personal virtue, other schools like altruism or communitarianism stress the importance of personal sacrifice for the common good. These are important questions. They remind us that the goal is not to become an autonomous island, completely detached. The goal is to find a subtle balance, how to preserve our personal integrity while also being a responsible, compassionate member of a community. Acknowledging these difficulties does not weaken the principles, it deepens them. It prepares us to face an even more universal struggle, our obsession with controlling reality itself. Through today's exploration, we've dissected the three most common prisons of the modern mind. We've seen that the path to stop caring what others think is not isolation, but a reorientation of our inner compass, building durable self-respect on our own values and virtue. We've learned that overcoming laziness is not a battle of willpower, but a strategic diagnosis, finding a big enough why, breaking fear into controllable steps, and embracing failure as part of the process. And we've exposed the steep price of being too nice, recognizing that setting healthy boundaries is not a selfish act, but a moral duty to protect our dignity and allow authentic relationships to flourish. Ultimately, all three paths converge on a core truth. Inner freedom is not a destination, but a continuous journey of self-awareness and conscious choice. It is the daily discipline of choosing authenticity over approval, action over delay, and self-respect over fearful compliance. Remember, you have tremendous power to reshape your life, not by changing the external world, but by mastering the world within. The question isn't whether life will throw challenges at you. The question is, how will you choose to face them? Where will you begin? This is a continuous journey, not an instant fix. If you're committed to this deep conversation about self-development and have found real value in our analysis, hit subscribe and turn on notifications right now so you don't miss any of the next discoveries. But don't stop here. We've addressed the symptoms: fear of judgment, procrastination, and weak boundaries. Do you recognize the common root of all three? It's our obsession with trying to control what was never controllable in the first place. Click the next video on the screen, and we'll continue the journey of freeing the mind.